Sound design is for me personally the key to bring your edit and with that your video and your overall storytelling to the next level. But every time you use the word story, there kind of comes this question with it. Does every video need a story? And the honest answer to that is no, it doesn't. But every video has one. What I mean by saying every video has a story, even though it may not need one, is that by creating a video, you are making a lot of decisions. You're deciding what to put in, what to leave out. Or maybe you don't, maybe you put everything in, like that was the way I used to do it. But you also decide on what works, what actually matches, and you're trying to literally make this thing work. And by doing this, you're creating a cohesive whole. And that cohesiveness I'm referring to, no matter if it has a traditional film structure or not, tells a story. And it can be as simple as telling a story of beauty with lots of beautiful shots, telling a fun story with lots of energy, telling a story of purity by having these beautifully focused and clean gear shots. That's enough. That's a story on its own. Storytelling, therefore, for me, is not really about how you tell a story by word or with your visuals explicitly, but how you can actually use everything at your disposal to make this thing work. In my particular case, the last video I uploaded from New Zealand is, well, all the footage I've shot is over a year old, almost 1.5 years, and I shot it on this G85. I hadn't the GH5 at the time, and I also did not have these beautiful Sigma art lenses I today love so much, but I had this little 12 to 16mm 3.5 to 5.6 kit lens. So what I'm basically trying to say is I just wasn't very happy with the visuals and I didn't feel like this was enough to tell the story or create the experience I want to create for this film. And therefore, I relied heavily on creating a sound design that kind of immerses the viewer into the experience I want to create. And I get to that in a minute. But first, let's talk about when and where to use sound design. When I started out, I did not use any sound design at all because I just didn't knew it was a thing. I didn't knew you would do these things. I just had my raw audio. Then when I kind of discovered sound design for myself, I started looking out where I could incorporate it and I just used it very nuanced. But then after a time, I just started abusing it. I started putting everything in there, rises and hits and whooshes and just going crazy with it, which can help sometimes. But eventually what you are trying to do as a filmmaker and storyteller is to actually control the use of your sounds. By that I mean that you should use sounds to enhance a mood or a feeling, or even take away sound to do exactly that. Or what you can also use it for is to, and I've used this word quite a few times and I will explain it in a second, really immerse the viewer into the experience. And I want to give you an example for when to actually particularly use sounds and when to not use them. For instance, when it's about memories, and maybe that's just me, but when I think of memories, my visual memories usually are not necessarily connected to sound. Sometimes I can kind of hear in my brain what someone said, but when I think back to an experience, I do not really hear those sounds happening. And one way to create those memory sequences is to dampen sounds. Another one is to really take them completely away. That's what I did in a snow day video where we went out with friends and I literally just shot the whole day. And in that video, I did not use any sound design at all because it felt right for me. This was the story I meant to tell. On the other hand, let's talk about when not to use sound to, for instance, create tension and how to disrupt that with, then again, using sounds. And just let me show you. So let's jump into Premiere, and this is the last film I created. And I will play this for you without any vocals, lyrics, without my voice, and without any music. What is happening here at the beginning is I took a portion of a track I was using and I kind of dampened it with the essential sound effect here, locked in the trunk, which is a thing you should never do to a person, but you can definitely do it to sound. And just to zoom in here, that whole section does not have any sound in it because I wanted to create a little bit of tension. And tension does not always mean that it must feel like, oh my God, what is happening? But it can just create a feeling of, well, there seems to be something off, there's something missing and you're kind of waiting for it to happen. This is what happens here when the first sound of the car happens and we basically transition into really the realm of having more natural ambient sound. And then later here, it goes a little bit crazy because I wanted to, again, create tension, but actually almost overusing sound. And then at the end, I'll play it for you in a second, I again take away all the sound. So at the beginning, I take away the sound to create tension, and at the end of it, I take away the sound to create form of a relief. And that's how it sounds with just sound effects. This is all our ambient sound, and sound gone. And now there starts to really happen a lot. Stuff happening. A lot of different scenes, some sun flares or glares, or however you want to call it. Now it's getting more relaxed again. Now, I've said quite a few times things like immersive and holistic, and these are big words, but what I actually mean by that is when you start building out your sound design and you want to make something really sound natural, kind of make it sound organic, like if you would be there, because that's one of the most important parts of storytelling. See, the psychology of stories works the way that even if I tell you about something that happened to me, you will put yourself into my shoes imagining this story. And the same happens with films. Therefore, it just totally makes sense to, when you want to create this immersive feeling, build out an as natural or as realistic sound ambience as possible. And a way to do this is by layering up sounds. When you really listen closely to your surroundings, you'll notice that the natural ambience does not consist of singular or separated sounds, but it's actually a mixture of all of them, right? So for instance, if you're sitting right in this moment in front of your computer, you're not only hearing my voice and the video, but maybe there's a slight humming or hissing from the device you're watching it on. Maybe there's something happening in the background, some city noise outside, or maybe some wind rustling you hear. And that all creates a natural feeling of our world. That's basically the mixtape of life, if you will. And let me show you an example how I approach that. Now you can already see that here's a lot happening, even though in this part I'm transitioning into a way calmer part than at the beginning, which really was just a montage. Visually speaking, there was no story in it. That was just for fun. But here, later on, I wanted to create a very natural ambience. That was my goal. A2 and A3 are basically music, and everything below that really is sound design. And you see I have these long chunks of sound. Now let me find a good example for what I guess this is a good scene. So, we're standing on a mountain, and you have some wind rustling, and then there's a waterfall, and there's a different waterfall. But in the background, what is happening, because there was a cruise at Milford Sound, there's constantly, this is actually a shoreline sound effect, but there's constantly the sound of water because we're moving through the water with the boat. And then in the background, further away, these are actually the waterfalls we're hearing. What I also did do was, for instance, mix a few different wind sounds together. So in this case, we have a very subtle wind in the background. And then when I see something like literally here waving in the wind, I added a more harsh sound. And there you have still the sound of the wind in the background, but a little bit more present, the sound of us walking. And then again, we have some harsher wind. So that's, for instance, how I'm layering it up. The goal is not to go crazy with it, but just to create a natural feeling ambience that kind of is enhancing the scenes and supporting what you're actually seeing. So that as a viewer, you can have this intuitive experience of almost feeling like you're there. This may sound obvious for some of you, but trust me, it definitely isn't, because it also wasn't for me. The one thing you don't want to do when you're about to finish a project, when you're putting on the final touches, is to search all across the goddamn internet for sound effects. And then you start to find some and you realize, oh, they're not free, I thought they were free, and then you find a way to get them free, but you can't, and then you start thinking about what if I use them anyway. You kind of reconsider that and you start searching for cheap stuff, and then you realize there's not everything you actually need, and the quality is garbage, and no. I've been there, done that, no, thank you. And this is where audio comes into play. So I use their music membership for quite a while now, and I love it. I find myself almost always choosing soundtracks from Audio these days. For this video, they also granted me access to their sound effects library, and I love it. It's truly awesome. In the sound effects library, you have different categories, like all of these here, but you also have, and I find that quite interesting, these collections, which are called Virus, Momentum, and Aura, where you have sound effects all kind of matching the same theme. You can also search and browse manually for sound effects. You can, for instance, type in running, and there you go. You get different running sounds, but also related sounds. And you get even suggested keywords to really ease your search for the sound effects you are looking for. When you'd like to check out how good and versatile the sound effects actually are, or get a feeling for it, you can watch the latest video I uploaded, Escaping to New Zealand, because all the sounds in that video I used, like literally every sound, even the music, except for my own voice, obviously, was from Audio. I decided to put myself up to the challenge to use no raw sound at all and create the whole ambience, everything from the sound effects library from Audio, and I'm blown away. I'm super happy with how it turned out. What makes Audio special is also that they have lifetime memberships. So you can get a lifetime music memberships for $299, and it's really lifetime, like forever and ever. And you can get a lifetime sound effects membership for $199. Those are separate. So if you want them both, there's even more, and it gets even better. Audio recently started their AudiioPro Subscription, which is music, sound effects, and it will cover you across all platforms. In their own words, from YouTube monetization to broadcast television, you're covered. And with that, Audio turns from a creator-based solutions for video creators in the internet to a business-based solution for literally everything to a super affordable price. If you'd like to check that out, if you're interested, there's a referral link down below. You can also use my code Wojtek10 for 10% off your purchase, and always keep an eye out for special promotions. And the only thing left to say before we get into the next section is thank you, Audio. This may sound super simple, but I feel that a lot of people are not really utilizing it to the fullest. Bridging sound for me means to fade audio in or out, either transitioning into a different sound rhythm, for instance from wind to water, or to fade it out and make space for something different, like a whoosh, like a transitional sound, or whatever there is. But the actually interesting thing about bridging sound is that you can do the opposite and do hard audio cuts to change the whole mood and feeling and even the rhythm of the film, and therefore tell your story with sound only, without music, the way you would like to have it. You can also do this with natural sounds without using like crazy rises and hits and all this fancy stuff that comes with an extensive sound effects library. Let me show you an example for that. We're again at Milford Sound. There are waterfalls. We have this very relaxing, nice ambience. And then so what I did here is, let me zoom in a little bit. We are having this shore sound. That's the calmness I'm referring to, if that makes any sense. We have a waterfall in the background, and we have a flare sound, which is also a fun thing I will get to in a minute. And then we are having these hard cuts with different water sounds interfering with the relaxed vibe. And then we go back again. So I hear, for instance, fade in a wave crashing sound, which is basically what this dolphin does. And then I have a whoosh sound enhancing this kind of zoom that is happening here. And then here I'm fading in a lot of different sounds, really to just support what is actually happening, just add to a little bit more to the scene, but in general to re-establish the calm again. And these are ways for me to really play around with sound bridges, but also with hard audio cuts, and that way influence the way I tell my story. It really is easy to pick out 1 or 2 sound effects, throw them into the edit and call it a day. What is difficult, on the other hand, is to create a realistic atmosphere with a lot of details. Enough details to give it a richness, to really make it feel immersive, but also nuanced enough to not create distractions. And for that, you have to be picky. And a good example for this is probably a little seal fight, which became one of my favorite scenes in this edits for different reasons, which I also will get back to. But for now, just notice that there are not only sounds of seals, but there are all these little taps and pats of their fins in there. And there's even, not sure if you noticed, there's here we're having a little crash. And I didn't want to make that too obvious, too harsh, like it wasn't supposed to be like, but it was supposed to be subtle, right? So it ended up being this very damp sound. And I did that to really make people feel like they're witnessing it, like they're close to the action, even though when we saw it, we probably might not even heard the sounds in real life. Let me give you another example. We have this scene here where Kat and I are walking up to the lake in front of Mount Cook. And what you actually hear is the first layer, that's wind sound. Then we have some lake sound here, water layering again. We also have this, oh, I love this sound. It's called moving mountains, which is just there to create kind of a presence of the mountain being there, if that makes any sense. What is also in there are 2 pairs of footsteps, one lighter pair of footsteps and one a little bit heavier sounding pair of footsteps. And what I try to explain with this is it would have been so easy to just throw in one sound effect and not even particularly match it to the steps that are happening. It usually works when it matches right about, when it's roughly the same speed walking than the people and the visuals do. But the sound then particularly is telling the story of one person walking, not 2 people walking. And this is also a thing, I mean, that you can use sound to enhance or actually support your story. And I think these things are important. It's like shooting something. The details are important. It's important that you have the right focus. It's important that your composition matches and that your exposure is right. And really the same thing applies for editing and sound design. You want to have the right cuts. You want to have them at the right time with the right timing. And you want to have the right sounds supporting the right things and telling the right story. So be picky. Some people may not want to hear this because they are searching for easy solutions. Just show me what button to push, what sound effect to apply, what look to apply, what preset to download and to install, and boom, gone, I'm out of here. That's not how it works for me. See, the reason I like to play around with sound design so much is exactly that. I get to play around, and this kind of gets me into this creative experimental state where I just really get to explore and try new things out and maybe screw up, but really learn a lot along the way and gain a deeper understanding of what I'm even doing. Here are a few examples. We are back in our seal scenario, and this particular sound, that's a female yawn. That's probably not how a seal should sound like, probably not how it sounds, but it kind of works for me. I think that really works. I just like how that sounds, and I'm really proud of it, and I'm really happy about it. And like I said, playing around with it, that's just such a pleasure. And all those sounds of the fins, are they even called fins of their feet basically tapping and plopping around. These are actually the sound you make when you pat your chest. And things I do to get to this, for instance, are I use the parametric equalizer to play around with the waves. I also use studio reverb in this particular case. When it's about the pad sound, I also did use a pitch shifter, and without going too much into detail about all of this, I really just play around and try to figure things out, how to make things sound differently or how to manipulate them to my particular use. A thing I also did is I couldn't find the sound of a sun flare or glare, and that's kind of obvious because these sounds do not really exist. Like if you have a sun flare or a glare, like that's not really doing much, does it? Right? Light does not really make sound, or at least we cannot hear it. But for some reason, it kind of feels natural to add these sounds, like I did in this case. I couldn't find that sound in the sound effects library, which is almost normal because they are very rare. I'm never sure how to even call those sounds. Do you call it a flare, a glare, a glow? Comment down below if you know how to actually search for those. But what I did is I experimented a little bit and I found this holiday magic sound, reversed it, like the original sound is this one. Oh no, it isn't. The original sound is this one. It's like a chime, not sure how you pronounce that. And I sped it up to 500%. That made it sound this way. And then I reversed it and I layered it on top and matched the timing so that I get one cohesive sound. I exported it, imported it back, and then I reused it for my project. I used it at different speeds. Like for instance, this one is at about 200, and sometimes I used a pitch shifter to give it a little bit of variety into sounds. And again, I think it works. And it would have been so much easier to search the internet for these particular sounds, the sound of a lens flare or of a seal, instead of creating them by myself. But rising up to the challenge and only using sound effects from the audio sound effects library, I feel like this actually elevated my skills, my understanding, and also my creativity. I really think that creativity is about experimenting and trying things out. I find myself so often resorting to best practices, things I've already done, things I know. And why do I do it? Because it's easy. But I've lately realized that exactly that behavior very often turns my passion into work. It kind of becomes dull, almost boring. And that's just not what I'm hoping for this whole process to be. I mean, if I call something my passion, it's supposed to be exciting. And when it's not exciting, when I kind of lose my courage to experiment and maybe even screw up, I also feel like I'm losing my creative spirit. Not my discipline, because I know that I'm disciplined. And I also believe that creativity has a lot to do with discipline. But when I lose that creative spirit to create something out of nothing, it just doesn't feel the same. So in that sense, try things out, experiment, play around, be creative. I hope this video was helpful, interesting, if not entertaining at least. If you have any particular questions, please leave them down below in the comments and I'll be happy to reply. I normally don't do that much of tutorial-like videos, but if you'd like to have more of these story-sided kind of breakdowns, like I said, I'm not the most technical guy, please let me know and I'll be happy to make another one for you. Until then, I see you.